Good morning, afternoon, evening, whenever you guys are watching this, Harry from 422. We're going to talk about unit testing today, but before we get into that, check your grades up to this point. I think you should have everything up to test number 3 and assignment number 4 graded. If you have an issue with a grade, send me a DM or an email. I'm trying to stay on top of this. I'm usually bad with grading. Anywho, it's so hot outside. I've hated, even coming in, I'm like sweating. But today we're going to talk about unit testing. And if you have any issues, let me know. But let's see what this is. Hopefully, some of you have heard of unit tests before. Back in Web222, we talked a little bit about it. I think we did one test or assignment on it. But think back to your last big assignment, even assignment 4 or 3, and at the very last minute, you probably had errors, right? Or even like some other class, OOP, and you changed something in your code, and now the whole program doesn't work, crashes, it's off by whatever, and like 1 decimal point, whatever. And if you think about this happens all the time because your code can become so huge, that it's hard to keep track of everything. Hard to keep track of your functions. For example, here's some code not near production or anything, but this is just like a crypto trading bot, and you can see it gets pretty complicated. And then there's things like in this, for example, there's there's stipulations on when to buy and sell, right? So if a certain number of people have bought or sold or a certain amount of liquidity, blah blah blah. And if I change some of this code by accident, or if something happens, on purpose, whatever, you can see right here, this is where the algorithm lives. If something changes and it's not expected, you could lose thousands and thousands of dollars. So we have these things called unit tests, which lets you test the code for your expected output. And that's basically the gist of what unit testing is. It's kind of funny. I used to say unit testing, they came up with the word unit testing because this happens in manufacturing. They test units of whatever it is, right? So, like, if say you have, a food production line that's making cookies. Well, they don't eat all of the cookies, but they want to test certain amounts of them so that they can see if they're good or bad, right? Or if like some chicken has salmonella, they'll recall all of the ones since the previous test. But they're not going to test every chicken, or they're not going to eat every cookie or test every second cookie. So I always preach this, that's where unit testing came from. And I think, because you're testing a single unit. But then I did do some research. It looks like there is some, as early as the late 1950s and 1960s, when NASA were big, sending rockets, new software was being used in these rockets and stuff like this. And NASA's very redundant, so they made up unit tests, and it became more popular in software, so in like production software. So a couple notable ones. Um, there's a programming language called Smalltalk, and Smalltalk was invented by a guy named Ken Beck. I know that just the names don't really matter, but you can look up the history, and basically he's like the quote unquote father of extreme programming. So it's a basis of agile programming where you do a lot of releases in short periods of time, as opposed to writing software for a long period of time and releasing it slowly, kind of like Grand Theft Auto 6. But yeah, so he invented this thing, unit tests, that you could constantly do releases of your software and not worry if there was an error or going back to check your functions, which eventually became unit test. This Kent released something called JUnit for Java, and then it just became, you know, um, a thing that we do. I personally don't like unit testing. You have to do it. It saved my ass a bunch of times, but we're going to go through some of this today. So you'll hear in industry, they call a small piece of your program the unit, function, module, class, along with its inputs and outputs. And you write a test for each of these units, and you get immediate feedback. So if you change something and the test breaks, you know exactly where to look. Typically, you'll write a unit test before you write the actual function, and that's like a good way to start, you know, checking. And the process of writing the unit test itself forces you to think through every possible input or output and what should happen if things go wrong. So again, back to that crypto thing. I had tries and catches, and I didn't catch a scenario where there was no crypto in the wallet, and it caused an error that I never saw before. If I had written a unit test for that, I would have caught that, wouldn't have crashed my program, would have transferred money, etc., etc. Right? So it takes like it makes you think about possible problems, making fewer surprises, and then ultimately you spend less time debugging when you're in like an actual hurry. Great in team projects. If someone on your team screws with your algorithm, screws with your module or your class, at least you know you have the accompanying test with it, and they have to go fix it. Right? Or have you ever stopped coding for a while? I do this all the time, and then come back to the code, revisit it a few months later. A good test suite tells you, hey, this still works, or you didn't change this, or hey, remember about this, or to do this. So Java has JUnit, uh, XUnit or NUnit, MS Test, that's for C Sharp. Mocha, Mocha plus Chai, I think. It's kind of a weird name. Jasmine, that's for JavaScript. Python is PyTest. This is probably the most popular. PHP is PHP Unit. Tons and tons of these. Tons and tons. Objective C, I know it used to be XC test. I don't know if that's still for Swift. And I don't know what it is for Kotlin. I would have just used, JUnit, and then C is CUnit. I'm pretty sure. There's tons. There's tons of these. In fact, the two for JavaScript, Mocha Chai and Jasmine. Um, I don't mind those two. The one we're going to learn today is JEST. They call it. And we're going to look at a demo of JEST today. JEST is really popular in React and Vue, and again, I'm not a huge React fan, but that's what we're going to use JEST as opposed to Jasmine. Debugging JavaScript is probably the one of the most difficult things to do because if you remember at the beginning of the course, I said JavaScript was designed for client side use and it was designed for the browser, right? So if I go to cnn.com and you right click and go inspect, you can see if you click on console, look at all the errors. Oops, here, watch this. Look at this. No, not that one. This one. Look at all the errors this has. It's crazy. The website still loads. And as you scroll down, you get more and more errors. But the reason why it's so difficult to debug JavaScript is because it's been designed so you can have these errors, but things still work. So unit tests are critical for JavaScript stuff, especially when we're doing server-side stuff with which is what we're doing with Node, because again, it's so forgiving, which sometimes make JavaScript difficult to use. So instead of blabbing on, let's start something. So let's just create a new next project. We'll do just npm next, and you can grab this off of here, this code if you want. And I just use the default parameters. This will install. And once that happens, make sure you change folders. If you don't change the folder, you're going to install the JEST modules in the folder above. I just did it. So here, watch this real quick. So if you paste in this next one, install npm install save dev jest. If I do this, it looks like it's installing, and then we end up with node modules and package.json outside of our actual application. So make sure you go into my app first, and then you can do your install. Once you have that, you can just double check your package.json and see that we have Jest. And notice it puts it under dev dependencies, not dependencies, because we wouldn't use unit tests at production, right? So these dependencies are production ones, these are for development. That's why we have the save dev flag right here. We can make our life a little bit easier if you go to the scripts node, I guess, if you want to call that, or section. And we're going to just add a test script. Don't forget the comma. And we're going to say, to run this, we're going to run jest. Watch all means all of the files. And just remember, when we do scripts like this, it's the same as typing. I could just type jest, watch all here, but instead I can now do npm test to run it. Sorry, not npm, npx test, right? And then we'll save that. We'll save that for a minute because we don't have any tests yet. So now pretty simple. Let's create a test folder inside of my app. And inside of here, we're just going to make something called, practice. .test.js. When you do it, like whatever the name is, practice is just because we're practicing. .test signifies, this unit test symbol. It just helps us see it a little bit better. So let's write a simple test here. Zoom it in for you. We'll do sum equals. Actually, hold on. Should I steal it from here? No, let's do our. I'll do my own. Sum equals a b. Super easy test, right? A plus b. Everyone should know what this does. Add a and b together. Super easy. Now, some of the code that we have to use with JEST, I was thinking JUnit, is we can describe the test. So we describe, and we should be able to do npm test. npm? Maybe it's npm. I said npx, didn't I? Or npx test? Anyway, there's an error. What's my error? Missing script test. Oh. Oh, I see. I didn't save the package.js one, so I added this, but it did not save. So here, let's try this one. And you can see it runs our script, and here's the output. So again, I think this was, in fact, the first assignment or the first test in Web 222, or maybe the second one, if you remember. It was kind of a pain in the butt. But again, this kind of will give you bad memories. Because we're set to watch all, this is kind of stuck in our test. So every time I save this file, it'll run the test again. So this happens if we're, running a bunch of tests. Again, this one's super simple. If I could change this to 4, it's probably going to fail, which it does, right? But it's very, very simple, right? So we say this is the practice test. Here's what I want to run, what it's expected to be, right? Expect to be. Now, if you scroll through this, you can see tons of these. You can have expected to be null, expected to be undefined, defined, whatever, truthy, falsy. That's like see if it's true or false. Tons of these. It's so great for JavaScript because again of how difficult it is, especially when you do stuff like, or when you have a var that's true as opposed to true, and things like if statements, right? If test equals true, or it doesn't equal true. Things like this, totally annoying and great for the unit test. I had this problem really the other day in the crypto thing. So if I just comment this quickly, groups. This basically groups the tests together. So if these are the practice tests, they all become under this one group. Right, and then this is an individual test, and then this is our exact what you expect. And I'll upload this code. I don't necessarily like this code, or it doesn't give you too many comments, but we'll do this one. Anyway, what am I doing? There we go. Not only can you test for strings, bools, you can also test for, tries and catches. So we could do something like bad function. Let's just do something real easy. Throw. And let's say the error is just like, oops, right? Shit, right? Better not do that. Oops. Come on. Right, and then, so this function would obviously just throw an error. But we can capture this too. So we're expecting bad function to throw, oops. Oh, my typing's atrocious. Save it, and you can see pass the test. But if I change this, oh, I lied. What the hell? That's interesting. So I think the error lies. Uh, this is weird. So this is obviously not the same as this, right? Oops, oops. But I have these quotes. So let me just change these quotes. Why? That's really strange. Throw new error. Oops. What am I missing? Sorry. This should be. I'm trying to force this to be an error. I don't understand why it's. Well, what the hell? OOPS. Maybe it's. Maybe it doesn't do. And like if the first part of it is okay, then that's weird. Here, check this out. Yeah, that's crazy. Okay, I didn't know that. So this is saying this is okay. That's a weird glitch. Someone we should email about that. That these are obviously not the same. But up until this S, I guess it doesn't care. But if I change something in it, wow, interesting. I'll look up why that is. It's funny. Anyway, you can test errors, I guess, within reason. You can see these passed all the tests. And another tricky thing I just noticed. So let's say, look how it says test suite, one passed, but we actually have two tests going on. So you can't forget to actually label the test itself, right? So like this and this, as well as group it in our actual our describe right here. This. Oh, I already have it. Right. So don't forget to do that. You can actually also put it in test, and this would be, you know, check for. Oops. Right. Now notice there's one test suite, which would be practice tests. And then the tests, there's two of them. Both of them passed. If I change this, hopefully it screws up. Yeah, see, it's not. What the hell? It's stupid. Why is this passing? Ugh, making me mad. There we go. It really has to not be the same. But you can see the summary at the bottom. One pass, one fail. And notice some bad coding practices. We should probably put our test within the same um, describe, right? So our same group, and then our function, really we should put it at the top above our tests in this case, or another file, whatever. But you can see, right? Because we don't always just want to test things that are happening in the one file. We can include them just like we would anything else. Anyhow, so far, these are just plain tests, did them in Web222. But how do we do this for React and specifically Next.js pages? So there's another testing library that has to go on top of this. It's called JSDOM, JSDOM. So like, the DOM, not DOM from Fast and Furious family, right? But DOM, document object model. So to get out of this, you can Q to quit or Control C, whatever you want. And I can install this environment or these modules. Again, React is, it's very good. I've seen people code circles around me in React, but there's so many like underlying layers of it. I think it is slow, but you know, Facebook would disagree. Guess it wasn't really Facebook. It was an employee from Facebook that invented React. Sorry, I jumped a little bit ahead. Um, my mistake. Oh, where were we? I had to pause the video. You didn't see that in real time. Anyway, um, I forgot. I'm not sure if I forgot, but if I forgot what I said in the video, and I don't want to go back because it's been 20 minutes. But don't forget to install the Jest environment. I was getting an error, that's why I paused because I didn't have it installed. But anyway, so to test React pages, I just made a new file called index.test.js. I imported the index page from our React app, which is under pages, right? Index.js. And all I'm checking here is to see if the home page has at least one link to Vercel.com. So that's what this code does. You could look into it. It's not a huge deal to. I wasn't going to run it line by line anyway. But so now what this is going to do in the background, instead of opening a new browser, it's going to render it for us in the background, and then parse the entire page looking for, um, you know, basically find the main divs, look for all the Ahrefs, and then check if Vercel.com exists in it. So if I go to my index, and you can see right here, there's a link to Vercel. And if I run the test, npm test, you'll see it passes. And if I change my Vercel link to something else, let's see. This should fail. So this is a way that we can test our web pages the same as our other code, except for we don't have to open a browser. This does it all kind of for us, which is pretty awesome. But you could basically run through the rest of these, try them if you want to. You can test for events too. You can test API. So our vehicle API, we can see, if index 2 has the VIN number, whatever. We can, like I said, there's some sample code on GitHub. You can go through. We could even check if our click counter is counting correctly. It's pretty awesome unit tests. They seem, once you start doing them, it's like, oh, they take so much longer than just writing the code yourself. But in the long run, it is going to save you time. Probably unit testing is a lot what you're going to do as like an intro programmer, junior developer, and you know, it is what it is. So get used to it, unfortunately. But good unit tests will save you time in the future. Anyhow, that's it. Short lecture, like I said. Let me know if you have any questions.